The water smelled wrong before Sarah Vance ever saw what was in it. She noticed it on her third patrol sweep of the morning. That low, mineral bite underneath the salt, like copper heating in a pan. The Pacific off New Meridian Station didn't smell like copper. It smelled like brine and kelp and distant diesel from the cargo shuttles that crossed from the orbital platform every 6 hours. That was the inventory she had learned at age 9, standing on her father's shoulders at the tide line, with her eyes shut, learning the ocean by nose the way a mechanic learns an engine. Copper wasn't in the inventory. She stopped walking and looked out past the breakwater. The morning was pale. The first swimmers were just appearing at the far end of the beach, 2 of them, retirees, by the look of their deliberate pace. She keyed her calm. "Dawson, run me a water temp pull on sector 7 through 11. A pause. Then Dawson's voice, still carrying the gravel of a man who'd had 1 coffee instead of 3. "Sarah, it's 0640. I know what time it is." Another pause. She heard him typing. 7 through 11 are running between 22 and 24 Celsius. Huh. Say it. Sector 9 is 29. She was already moving toward the tower. The Ketheron had been in the solar system for 11 of what they considered years. A unit of time, approximately 4 times longer than an Earth year. In human terms, they had been here for 44 years, though. For most of that time, here had meant the dark fringes of the asteroid belt, watching. They were patient in the way that creatures with a 300-year lifespan tend to be patient. They had cataloged 11,000 species across 42 star systems. They had watched a dozen civilizations emerge and extinguish themselves. They found the process informative. The humans were unusual in only one respect that the Ketheron survey teams had identified as significant. They were inefficient. Every other spacefaring civilization the Ketheron had observed had optimized their energy expenditure within the first century of industrialization. The humans had not. They burned, they poisoned, they fought each other constantly over resources they had the technology to synthesize. It was almost medically fascinating. The survey team's conclusion was unanimous. The humans were not a threat. The assessment came with a secondary note, appended by Scifi Mind Vel Ori, who had been watching longer than any of the others. Inefficiency is not the same as incapability. Heard with caution, no one had given the note much weight. Vel Ori was old, and old survey minds tended toward excess caution. It was considered a kind of professional ailment. The Ketheron's first contact protocol was simple. Introduce a controlled stimulus into the target civilization's environment. Observe the response. Calibrate from there. The stimulus they chose for the humans was minimal. 3 biological units. The Ketheron had no analog for the concept of animal in the way humans used it. All biological entities were, to them, tools, were seeded into the Pacific Ocean near a coastal population center. The units were semi-autonomous. They ran hot. They would cause a localized disruption, draw a response, and the survey team would measure the nature and speed of that response. It was not cruelty. The Ketheron did not experience cruelty. It was calibration. Sector 9 was a 400-meter stretch of open water between the main beach and the outer reef. By the time Sarah got the retirees out and had Dawson running the drone grid, the temperature in Sector 9 had climbed to 33 degrees. "Something's heating the water," Dawson said. He was 23 and had the specific kind of confidence that comes from being good at technology and not yet old enough to know that technology fails. He ran the drone low over the sector, the camera feed flickering on the tower screen. "Could be geothermal. That ridge under 9 has always been there," Sarah said. On the screen, 12 feet below the surface, something moved. It was large. That registered first. Then the heat signature. The drone's thermal camera painted it in white hot against the cool blue of the water. A shape roughly 12 feet long, with a dorsal fin that pulsed with something that was not bioluminescence, and was not heat shimmer, and was not anything Sarasa had a word for. It looked like a power core cycling, like a reactor at partial load. "That's a shark," Dawson said. "That's not a shark. It's the shape of a shark. The shape of a shark, yes. The skin of a shark, possibly. The skin was wrong. Matte in patches, almost crystalline in others. And where the light caught it at the right angle, Sarah could see structures embedded just beneath the surface. Geometric. Deliberate. The animal, or the thing shaped like an animal, turned in a slow arc and moved toward the reef. 30 seconds later, a school of fish boiled to the surface, dead, belly white. She called Director Halm at 07:15. He was already up, which meant someone else had called him first, which meant the situation had a political dimension she was going to have to navigate around. "Stand your people down, Vance," he said before she could speak. "I know about Sector 9. I know about the dead fish. Maritime Affairs has it. Maritime Affairs doesn't have lifeguard authority over New Meridian Beach. Maritime Affairs has authority over whatever it wants when there's a federal interest." A pause. The sound of a car in the background. He was already moving somewhere. "The beach stays open." Stood? With something like that in the water, the beach stays open. Are 17,000 hotel bookings on New Meridian Point this week. You know what a full closure costs? She knew. She also knew what a full closure would cost. The people whose swimming that thing had been orbiting when she'd pulled the drone footage. She stood in the tower with the Pacific stretched out below her, ordinary and blue and wrong in that one specific sector, and she thought about her father's lesson about smells, and she said, "Understood," and hung up. Then she pulled up the personnel roster and started making calls. There were 5 of them by 9 o'clock. Dawson, because he had the drones, and because he'd already seen what was in the water and couldn't unsee it. A killer, who had been on the water rescue team for 6 years, and who Sarah trusted more than she trusted most walls. Gio Santos, 61 years old, and built like something that had been compressed under pressure for decades, who had been patrolling New Meridian Beach since before Sarah was born, and who had seen, he said, enough strange things in the Pacific that this would merely be the strangest. And Cal Ewan, who was 20, and should not have been there at all, except that Cal had been running the water chemistry station that morning, and had logged the first anomaly before Sarah had even smelled the copper. And Cal had a right, Sarah felt, to be part of whatever came next. "Here's what we know," Sarah said. She spread the drone footage across the tower screens, the thermal images, the dead school of fish, the single clear frame where the thing had surfaced briefly, and she could see unmistakably that the structures beneath its skin were not bone and not cartilage, and did not belong to anything that had evolved in any ocean on this planet. It heats the water. It kills everything in its immediate vicinity. It has never been recorded before, in this ocean or any other, and Maritime Affairs knows about it and wants the beach open. "Maritime Affairs," Gio said, with the specific tone of a man who had been lied to by institutions for 40 years, "does not give one single damn about this beach." "They give a damn about something," Priya said. "People don't get that bureaucratic about a shark." "Because it isn't a shark," Dawson said. He had been quiet since they'd gathered, running searches on his tablet, cross-referencing the thermal images against every database he could access. Now he looked up. "Thermal signature is consistent with what you'd get from a contained fusion reaction. Not nuclear fission, fusion. The skin structures, I can't identify the material, but the geometry is non-organic. Whoever built this thing built it to look like a shark." The word hung in the room. "Whoever," Cal said quietly. Built it," Dawson confirmed. "I think it's a probe or a weapon. Both." Sarah looked out at the water. The morning had gone full and bright, and the beach was filling up. A family had set up near the tide line, 2 kids running at the surf. She watched them until she couldn't watch them anymore. "All right," she said. "Here's what we're going to do." The Keth Oron's monitoring team registered the first anomaly at what would correspond to mid-morning, Pacific time. The biological units had performed as expected. The fish die-off had propagated correctly. The localized temperature elevation was within design parameters. Coastal settlement had produced the expected first response. Authorities had been alerted. Some bureaucratic friction had occurred. The settlement's open water protocol had not been activated. What was not normal was the drone. Velori, the old survey mind, noticed it first. A small aerial unit had been operating over the affected sector for approximately 90 minutes, running systematic grid patterns that suggested deliberate mapping rather than casual observation. The unit was equipped with thermal imaging. It had made at minimum 4 passes over Biological Unit 2, the one currently running at the highest heat output, and each pass was slightly adjusted from the last, optimizing the angle. They're characterizing it, Valori said. The monitoring team's response was politely dismissive. Humans had drones. Humans flew drones over many things. It was expected. They're not observing, Valori said. They're measuring. Is a difference. The monitoring team noted this in the secondary record and returned to their primary work. Valori watched the drone's grid pattern change on its fourth pass, shifting from mapping to what appeared to be deliberate thermal provocation. The unit was flying low enough to cause surface agitation, which was forcing Biological Unit 2 to maneuver, which was generating additional thermal data. The human operating the drone was learning how the thing moved. Valori flagged the observation as Priority 2. The monitoring team downgraded it to Priority 4 within the hour. Old survey minds they had decided long ago were alarmists. By noon, Sera knew 3 things she hadn't known at dawn. The first, there were 3 of them, not 1. Dawson's expanded grid had found the other 2 units in sectors 14 and 22, holding position near the reef, running cold. Perhaps 40% of the heat output of the one in Sector 9, dormant or waiting. She didn't know which and couldn't afford to guess wrong. The second, the thing in Sector 9 was not random. Its movement pattern, mapped over 6 hours of footage, described a precise grid. It was running in its own survey, moving in interlocking arcs that covered every square meter of the sector at regular intervals. It was collecting data. On what she didn't know. On the fish population, maybe. On the ocean floor. On the swimmers, before she'd pulled them. The third thing she knew was the one that kept her standing at the tower window, without moving for almost 10 minutes after Dawson showed it to her. There was a signal. Tight beam, non-standard frequency, pulsing every 47 seconds from all 3 units toward a point, approximately 22 degrees above the horizon, to space. It's reporting, Dawson said. He looked scared in the way that people look scared when they've been smart their whole lives and have suddenly encountered something that redefines the scale of the problem. To something up there. Put these things here. How long has it been transmitting? Since before we were watching. Days maybe. Maybe longer. Sera thought about that. She thought about whatever was up there receiving 47-second reports on the human response to the things in the water. She thought about the family on the beach, the kids running at the surf, the 17,000 hotel bookings on New Meridian Point. She thought about the institutional indifference of Director Holmes' voice that morning. She thought about her father, who had died of a lung condition caused by particulate matter from the smelter that had operated for 12 years, 4 miles from their house, and who had never once gotten an answer from the company or the regulators about whether the smelter had caused it. She was done waiting for someone else to handle this. Dawson, she said, I need to know if we can block the signal. They couldn't block it. What they could do, what Dawson figured out over 45 minutes with a portable transmitter, a frequency analyzer, and what he described as a lot of improvised math, was mirror it. Introduce enough noise on the same frequency band that the signal-to-noise ratio degraded from up there. They'll know something's interfering, Dawson said. They already know we know something's down here. They saw the drone. How do you know they saw the drone? Because something that careful about what it's doing down there is equally careful about everything else. Sera looked at the transmitter. A repurposed marine emergency beacon, modified with components from the water chemistry station, and held together with what appeared to be a significant quantity of waterproof tape. It's not perfect. It buys us time. How much? Dawson considered. Maybe 3 hours before whatever's up there realizes the degradation is deliberate and adjusts. Maybe less. Then we use 3 hours. What she needed was bait. The unit in Sector 9 had a behavioral pattern now. 6 hours of data had given her that. Every 40 minutes, it would widen its arc, moving from the sector boundary to the outer reef and back. The widest point of the arc brought it within 80 meters of the maintenance dock on the station's eastern promontory. The dock was empty. The dock had power. We're going to plug in, Sera said at the afternoon briefing. She had written it out on the tower's whiteboard in her precise, slightly left-leaning handwriting. The unit's arc, the dock, the timing. These things run on heat. We give them a bigger heat source, and they investigate it. When it comes in close, we need to know if we can disrupt it. Disrupt it how? Cal asked. Trawlysis. Priya said this, and everyone turned to look at her. She shrugged. I've been thinking. It's using a contained reaction for propulsion. Use a strong enough electrical current into the surrounding water, and you might destabilize the containment. It's not guaranteed. It's also going to be extremely illegal, Geo said. Everything we've done today is extremely illegal, Dawson said. We jammed a signal that was probably being received by something that can see us from orbit. We are well past the point of illegal. Geo looked out the window at the beach. Then he looked at Sarah. How much cable we got, he said. They had enough. The maintenance dock had a 400-amp industrial power draw for the equipment lifts. Priya and Geo ran the cable in 40 minutes, working fast in the afternoon heat with their boots soaked from the dock wash. Cal handled the timing. He had a countdown running off the drone footage, tracking the unit's arc, calling out the intervals in a flat voice that Sarah found, for reasons she couldn't articulate, deeply steadying. Dawson stayed on the signal jammer. He sat in the tower with his headphones on and a cup of cold coffee he hadn't touched, watching frequency graphs scroll. It's adjusting, he said at the 2-hour mark. Whatever's up there, it's trying to compensate for the noise. How long? 40 minutes. Maybe 50. We'll be done in 30, Sarah said, and believed it when she said it. She was standing on the dock when the unit made its wide arc. She saw it coming from 50 meters out. The thermal distortion first. A shimmer in the water, like heat haze over asphalt, and then the dorsal fin, that slow, terrible cycling pulse, and then the shape of the thing just below the surface. It was beautiful, in the way that very dangerous things sometimes are. It moved with complete certainty. It had no concept of the dock, or the cable, or the 5 humans arranged in various states of controlled terror around it. It had a task, and it was performing the task. Sarah watched it come. She was thinking about the signal it was sending every 47 seconds, and what was being done with that data up there, and what the next phase of the calibration would look like if this feast concluded successfully. She was thinking about the family on the beach that morning. She was thinking about Dawson's word, whoever, and what it meant for the world she'd been living in, and what it meant for every rash assumption she'd ever made about what was watching and what wasn't. She picked up the radio. Cal, give me the count. 14 seconds, Cal said. 13. 12. The thing in the water turned and she could see its eye, or what served as its eye. A flat, dark sensor array, hexagonal, not organic, not pretending to be organic at this distance. It registered her. She didn't know what that meant to it, whether it processed her as an obstacle, or as a data point, or as something beneath classification entirely. 7. Cal said. 6-5. She held the radio very still. 2-1. She keyed the circuit. The monitoring team noticed the disruption immediately. The biological unit in Sector 14 lost signal coherence for approximately 8 seconds, an eternity in Kethoron monitoring terms. When it reacquired, the unit's internal systems were reporting a cascade failure in the thermal regulation core. The unit was still functional, but degraded, running at 30% of nominal. Electrical interference, said one of the team. The maintenance dock on the eastern promontory. They've tapped into the local power grid. A silence fell across the monitoring station that was, for the Kethoron, somewhat unusual. They improvised an electromagnetic disruption system, said another member of the team, from a maintenance dock and what appears to be cable normally used for equipment lifts. More silence. Vel Ori, the old survey mind, said nothing. He had been saying nothing for some time. He found that, at his age, silence was more instructive than speech in moments like this. He watched the secondary screen, where the drone footage was still transmitting. Dawson had never actually stopped running the drones, had he, even while the signal jamming was active, even while the electrical operation was underway. The human was watching all 3 units simultaneously, correlating data. Priority level, said the team lead. Vel Ori waited. Someone said 3. The monitoring team reached a consensus of priority 3. Vel Ori, very quietly, upgraded his own working assessment to priority 1 and did not share this with the team. The unit wasn't dead. That was the first thing Sarah confirmed when the water stopped churning. It was damaged. The thermal signature had dropped dramatically, and it had retreated to the deep edge of the sector, where it was holding position and, she assumed, running some kind of internal diagnostic. But it was not dead, and the other 2 units were now on the move. They had been dormant. They were not dormant anymore. They responded to the disruption, though, Priya said. She was standing at the tower window, watching the drone feeds. The other 2 units are converging on Sector 9. How long? 12 minutes for the one in 14, 20 for 22. They're coming to assess the damage, Geo said. To retaliate, Dawson said from his station. He still had the headphones on. His voice was tight. The signal. The thing up there is transmitting now, not just receiving. Whatever we did, we got a response. Sarah looked at the beach. It was mid-afternoon and still full. She calculated. 400 meters to the Silsnera swimmer from Sector 9, and the healthy units could cover that distance in under a minute. She keyed her radio. All stations full red, water evacuation, all sectors. We have an imminent threat in the water. Move. Holmes' voice came back immediately, angry and not surprised, which told her everything she needed to know about how long he'd had this information before she did. Vance, I told you. The beach is closed, Director.
You can fire me after.
She put the radio in her pocket and turned back to the screens. Priya had an idea. She had been sitting on it for an hour because it was insane. But it was also, she admitted, the only idea she had. The unit in 9 is damaged, she said. It's running 30% heat output, maybe less. It's still running a fusion reaction, even a degraded one. If we can get it out to deep water, past the continental shelf, and trigger a full containment failure. How? Sarah said. Same method. But we need to do it out there, not in here. Priya spread the navigation charts across the table. Continental shelf dropped at approximately 14 miles offshore. If we can get it to chase something out there, and then hit it again. It's not going to chase a maintenance dock 14 miles offshore, Cal said. No, but it might chase the thing that just hurt it. Priya looked at Sarah. Sarah looked at the charts. The station boat, she said. Station boat has a 200-amp service connection and a diesel generator we can overload if we need a bigger pulse. If we overload the generator 14 miles offshore, we're dead in the water. Yes, Priya said. Another silence. This one had a different quality than the others. Geo said, I'll drive. Geo, I've been driving that boat since before you were born, Vance. I know exactly what it will and won't do. And I'm 61 years old, which means I've already gotten more years than most of the things I was afraid of when I was young. He said this with a complete lack of drama, the way he said most things, and it landed harder for it. Take the boat out. You tell me what to do when I get there. The evacuation took 11 minutes. Sarah would think about those 11 minutes for a long time afterward. The way her team moved without being asked, reading the situation and the crowd and each other, never raising their voices above what was necessary, never stopping to explain when a gesture would do. Cal at the south end, Dawson running the drones to direct foot traffic from above, Priya taking the water directly, swimming the buoy line with powerful strokes and pulling it in behind her so that no one would wade past it without meaning to. 11 minutes to clear 400 meters of beach. She watched the drone feed while she ran. The 2 active units had reached Sector 9. They circled the damaged one once, then turned outward. And she saw the moment they registered the evacuation, registered the humans on the shore, registered whatever it was they were programmed to register. She was going to think later many times about that moment, about the fact that they paused, recalculated, that whatever signal they sent upward in that 40-second cycle had changed in some way she couldn't measure. And whatever was receiving it had received something new. She didn't have time to think about it now. Geo, you're clear to move, she said into the radio. Moving, Geo said. The station boat was a 22-foot rigid inflatable, built for rough water and reasonable speed, and absolutely not for being used as bait for things that shouldn't exist. Geo took it out fast, throttle wide, the hull slapping the swells in a rhythm he knew by feel better than by thought. In his earpiece, Dawson was calling positions. They've separated from Sector 9. The 2 active units are, North unit is tracking you. South unit is heading toward the beach. How far behind the beach unit, Sarah's voice? 80 meters. Then Sarah to Priya. Go. Geo didn't hear what Priya did. He kept his eyes forward, watching the shelf marker on the GPS, watching the water around him for the thermal shimmer. The morning's copper smell was everywhere now, thick enough to taste. He had fished these waters for 30 years, and he had never tasted copper in them. And he found himself making a specific, involuntary promise to the ocean that he would be back to fish them again, if it could hold together, for the next 40 minutes. The thermal shimmer appeared at 2 o'clock. North unit is 40 meters behind you, Dawson said. It's running hot. 60% output, maybe more. That's the repair, Geo said. They fixed it. Or one of the healthy ones took over the pursuit. A beat. It doesn't matter. Shelf is in 6 minutes at your current speed. I know where the shelf is. 6 minutes. He thought about his wife, who would be sitting in the garden at this hour, with her coffee going cold, listening to the radio. He thought about his daughter in Lisbon, who was 26 and building bridges, which seemed from this vantage like a fine and useful thing to spend a life on. He thought about the beach, which he had walked every morning for 3 decades, and the water which had smelled wrong this morning. And Sarah Vance, who had noticed the smell. He felt, not for the first time in his life, that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. On the beach, the South unit had come in. Priya had positioned herself at the waterline with the second length of dock cable, 200 meters of it laid out behind her in the surf, connected back to the emergency generator on the station's south tower. She had a clicker in her hand, a simple switching device salvaged from the tower's electrical panel, and she was standing in 6 inches of water, watching the shape come in from the sea. It was faster than the one in Sector 9 had been, fresher. Thermal distortion preceded it by 20 meters, and she could see, at the leading edge, the way the water turned faintly luminescent, all the small organisms in it reacting to a heat source they had no framework for. She waited. Cal was behind her on the beach, watching the depth meter on the drone feed, calling the distance. 10 meters, 8.6. She waited until the dorsal fin broke the surface, until she could see it clearly, until she could see the geometry of the skin structures and the flat dark sensor array, and all the evidence that this thing had been designed by something patient and distant and entirely indifferent to the people on this beach. She thought about indifference. She had thought about it a lot in the past 6 hours. She hit the switch. The South unit seized. That was the only word for it. A full-body spasm, the smooth motion arrested, the thermal output spiking and then crashing as the containment cycled against the electromagnetic pulse. It rolled. It thrashed once, twice, in a way that was almost organic, almost animal, almost as if something inside it was fighting the failure. Then it went cold, stood in the surf, with the clicker still in her hand, and watched the thing drift, still and dark and dead, toward the shore. Cal made a sound behind her that was not quite a word. "South unit is down," she said into the radio. Voice was steady. She was proud of that in a detached way. "Geo, your turn." The shelf. The GPS pinged and Geo cut the engine to half throttle, just enough to maintain position in the swells. Behind him, the thermal shimmer was enormous. The North unit had accelerated during the final approach, the heat spike visible even to the naked eye now, the water around it boiling white. "Dawson," Geo said, "tell me when it's close enough." 15 meters, Dawson said. 12. 10. Geo reached down and pulled the cover off the generator's manual override. It was not a complicated mechanism. A dial and a switch and a safety that he removed with 2 fingers. 7 meters. He thought of his wife's coffee going cold. 5. He turned the dial. He hit the switch. The generator gave everything it had, all at once. The kind of power draw that the manufacturer's warranty specifically warned against, in terms that were both forceful and very specific about liability. The cable went rigid. The water between the boat and the unit erupted. Not in fire, exactly, but in light, that specific blue-white discharge of electricity meeting salt water in quantity. And inside the light, the shape of the North unit, thrashing, fighting, the thermal output climbing as the containment lost coherence, climbing and climbing until it was brighter than the sun on the water. And then, not an explosion, quite. A release, like pressure equalizing, a sound like a very large door closing. The water settled. The thermal shimmer was gone. Geo sat in the dead boat, drifting on this shelf with no engine and no power, and an excellent view of the horizon, and he breathed the Pacific air, which smelled of salt and kelp, and faintly, something burning, and no longer of copper. After a moment, he said, "The monitoring station was quiet for a long time." Velori was the first to speak. "All 3 units are non-functional," he said. "Biological material from Unit 2 has been recovered by the humans. They will characterize it within standard assessment windows." The monitoring team processed this. "The human response was non-standard," said the team lead. "The timeline is inconsistent with previously observed crisis behavior patterns. Earlier interventions, localized threat, authority notification, authority inaction, are consistent with recorded precedents. Subsequent phase is not." "No," Velori said. "They improvised an electromagnetic disruption system from available infrastructure. They coordinated. Without established command structure. They evacuated the threatened population concurrently with conducting the counter-operation, rather than sequentially." The team lead paused. The female, the one who initiated the first drone survey, she had characterized the movement pattern of Unit 3 before we had recalibrated after the dock event. Velori said nothing. He was looking at the last transmission from the South Beach camera, the one they had piggybacked on without the humans knowing. Priya Kaler, standing in 6 inches of water with a switching device in her hand, watching something ancient and engineered and alien come at her from the deep, and waiting. Waiting until she had maximum effect, not firing early, not firing late, waiting. "Upgrade the assessment," Velori said. "Full priority 1. Inform the High Survey." "The High Survey will want to know our recommendation," said the team lead. "Tell them," Velori said, "that we made an error. We assessed this civilization as inefficient and therefore low threat. We conflated their expenditure of resources with their expenditure of capacity." He looked at the image of Priya in the surf one more time. "They do not optimize, because they do not need to optimize. They have enough capacity that waste is irrelevant. What matters is what they do when they cannot waste, when circumstances reduce them to what they actually are." He paused. "They actually are is a problem." He closed the feed. "Tell the High Survey we will require a significantly different approach, and tell them we will need time to develop it." "How much time?" Velori thought about a woman who had smelled copper in water at dawn, and by afternoon had rendered 3 advanced biological instruments non-functional using dock cable and improvised math. "More than we planned for," he said. The debrief with Maritime Affairs lasted 4 hours and was, from Sarah's perspective, mostly an exercise in watching people who had been wrong try to reframe their wrongness as something other than wrongness. She sat through it with the patience she had learned from early mornings and slow tides, and the particular discipline of watching the water, which is that most things resolve themselves if you watch them long enough and act at the right moment. They tried to classify everything. She expected that. She signed 3 forms that she knew were probably unenforceable, and one that almost certainly was. And she did not fight any of them because fighting was for energy she might need later. Gio was towed in by the Coast Guard. He drank 2 cups of coffee in the station kitchen before anyone official arrived to interview him, and when they did arrive, he told them exactly what had happened, with a precision and calm that made one of the federal agents visibly uncomfortable. He smiled at the agent's discomfort in a way that was not unkind. Dia retrieved the casing of the South unit from the tide. She wrapped it in a tarp and put it in the back of her truck and drove it home, and did not mention it in any of her official statements. No one asked about it directly, and she decided that ambiguity was its own kind of answer. Dawson was offered a position with 3 different federal agencies within 72 hours of the incident. He called Sarah to ask what she thought. "What do you want?" she said. "I want to know what's up there," he said. "Then go find out," she said, "and call me when you do." Cal went back to running the water chemistry station. He logged the returned to normal temperature in sectors 7 through 11 at 0800 the following morning, filed the report in the standard format, and added a note at the bottom that his supervisor would later remove before forwarding it upward. The note said, "Anomaly resolved. Human response 6 hours from initial detection to full neutralization. No civilian casualties. Recommend review of response protocols for non-standard biological threats." His supervisor removed it because it seemed presumptuous. Sarah didn't read the filed report. She already knew what was in the water. She was back on morning patrol. 3 days later, 5:45. First light turning the horizon brass. Beach was empty. The air was cold and clean and smelled the way it was supposed to smell. Brine, kelp, distant diesel from the orbital cargo runs. She stopped at the Sector 9 marker and looked out. The water was flat, ordinary, blue, in the way the Pacific is blue when it has not recently been disturbed by something that should not exist. She stood there for a while. She thought about the signal, pulsing upward, every 47 seconds. She thought about what was up there receiving it. She thought about Vel Ori. She didn't have a name for whatever had been watching. But she thought about it. The watching, the deliberate and patient watching, the clipboard and stopwatch quality of being observed. She thought about what the next phase would look like. Whether there would be a next phase. She thought about Cal's note, the one his supervisor had removed. No civilian casualties. 6 hours. Recommend review, she thought. We did not do this because we knew what it was. We did it because it was wrong. And it was here, and we were the ones who noticed. She thought that was probably enough for now. She pulled out her comm and started the first patrol sweep of the morning. The water smelled right.